Okay, so today we are going to talk about detail codes. This is the basic 101 detail code stuff. We're only going to talk about detail code stuff, and we're not going to get into application of payment, even though later on down we are going to be entering charges, entering payments, entering reversing charges and payments. But we're not going to get into application of payments because that is the next class. So we're going to talk about what is here on the agenda. So we're going to talk about what are detail codes, where are detail codes used in Banner. We're going to go over the TSA DETC form, and then we're going to look at TSA Rev because you guys use TSA Rev a lot. So detail codes in general, if you don't already know, if you've been here for a hot minute, you probably already have a semi-understanding of what a detail code is, but we're going to talk about it just a little bit. So a detail code is a unique 4-digit, and that is important. It's only 4-digit. It can only be 4 digits. It can't be bigger than 4 digits. So keep that in mind, and it is associated with a description of what the detail code is, and it represents a specific Banner fund, organization, program, and account codes where this transaction will post. So a detail code is how we keep track, if you want to say it in layman's terms, of payments and charges. And that is mainly what we deal with. We have receivables, which are charges, and we have payments, which are your revenue. Well, it's not really revenue. It's your payments that cover your revenue that you took from your charges. So that's simply what a detail code is keeping track of charges and keeping track of payments inside a Banner. Where do we use the detail codes? We use detail codes mainly in TSA DETC. So TSA DETC is the detail code control form, and then we use them in TASREV. So TASREV is your main student accounts form that most everybody goes into on a daily basis if you're dealing with charges or payments or anything with student accounts. Those are the main 2 spots that they are used. And I know you're thinking, well, they're used in way more spots than those 2 spots. Yes, they are. But these are the main forms. This is the control form for your detail codes, and this is the entry form for your charges and payments, which are detail codes. So TASREV, when you enter the information into TASREV, it's entered into a table. So it's an Oracle table. This is a database, a relational database, which means there are different little tables that house different information, and all of those tables are connected via a relative. So let's say if you talk about this in family terms, it's a relationship. So you have aunts and uncles because of your relationship with your mother and your father, right? So that's kind of how it is. There's one relationship that ties all of these tables together all over the database. But when you enter information into TASREV, it goes into a table called TBR-ACCD. And TBR-ACCD is used then to bounce off of other tables, such as TSA DETL, TGI-CCD, any of those tables that have student account code or any of those forms that have student account information all bounce off of TBR-ACCD, which is the starting point of TSA-AREV, right? So they all go back to one spot. So it's the main spot that you're looking for is your TSA DTC and your TASREV, and then everything else bounces off of that. So the first thing we're going to dig into a little bit is TSA DETC. TSA DETC, like I said before, is your detail code control form, and it controls your detail codes. In order for you to enter a detail code into TASREV, that detail code must first be created in TSA DETC. You can't put a detail code in TASREV without it being here first. So what they call that in Banner lingo is they call that referential integrity. So what it does is it keeps the integrity of the database by not allowing you to enter data into one table that doesn't first exist in a validation table or a parent table, in another spot. That was a lot, but it all flows together, in other words. So we all have relationships, so do these tables in Banner that hold all of your data. So permissions and access to TSA DTC is very limited. It should be limited. And so if you're sitting here thinking, I don't have access to TSA DTC, maybe you probably shouldn't, right? So there are certain folks in your business office or certain staff in your business office area that will need modified permission to TSA DTC, and there are some that won't. Now, that's not to say that you don't need to have maybe view capabilities to TSA DTC, but not every person in the business office needs to have access or permission to TSA DTC in a modified capacity. The reason for that is that when we're going through TSA DETC in just a second, you'll see that you can very quickly make changes on TSA DETC, not realizing that it's going to affect everyone in the college, right? So that is why permissions are limited to TSA DETC. So if you are wondering if you need access or permission, that is something that you'll need to talk to either your Banner accounts supervisor or your accounting director or your VPA. Those are the ones, those are the staff members, the leadership in your area that generally determine who has access to TSA DETC and who doesn't. It also depends on your job function. If your job function is to run application payments, then by all means, you should have modified access to TSA DTC, because in order for application of payments to work, you have to change priority codes on TSA DTC. So it all depends on job function and then the leadership of your area as to who has access or permission. So that's all I'm going to talk about on permissions. There are some schools are tighter on their permissions than others. And that is just something that goes on at your college. So, standard detail code rules. There are standard detail code rules. Here at TCSG, if you came from a Board of Regents school, or you came from outside of the system from another private college or something like that, you may not understand the reason why you can't just go out there and create a detail code. Here is why. There's a standard set of detail code rules that were set up and established by TCSG. It was done with work and coordination through all of the colleges, and what it helps us do is to standardize all of our detail codes so that at, say, for example, we'll just use Chattahoochee. So if Chattahoochee wanted to set up a tuition charge, but they didn't want to name it TUIT, they wanted to name it TUIO, right? But then at Southern Crescent, well, they didn't want to name it. There's TUTIO. They wanted to name it TUIS, right? So then everyone would be having different ones. Or if we could say, for example, South Georgia decides they want to go rogue and they don't want to name their tuition with a TU. They want to name it HAPPY, right? HAPP. So you can do anything you want to within Banner, but it would be incredibly difficult for TCSG as a whole to then pull your data when we need to know how much tuition all of the colleges have done in the fiscal year of 23, right? So it just makes it more easily for reporting standards when we all use the same codes all across all 22 colleges. Now, that is not to say that we do not give you guys a little bit of wiggle room, because we do. So we give you that wiggle room inside what we call wildcards, and those are the ones that have percent signs in the detail codes. So let me show you an example of that. So if we go to the intranet, this is an important place. If you go to admin services and then you go to accounting, this is where we put all of our information. This is where your Banner online training documentation and online videos are. This is where your internal documentation is. This is where your banner procedures are and FAQs. So this is an important spot. So if you click on external documentation, it's going to take you down to this little spot right here. And then this is the important guy that we're going to look at and talk to. So this is a downloadable detail code matrix. It opens in Excel, and this is your BFF, right? So this is going to be your friend, especially if you are new to setting up detail codes or something along in there. These are all of our standard detail codes that we have. If it is not on here, you cannot use it, right? So that, just keep that in mind. So like I said, everybody uses INAC as the charge code for accident insurance. And everyone uses 1 IAC, 2 IAC, and 3 IAC for cash, check, or credit card payments. And everyone uses 4 IAC for refunds, right? So all the way across, everyone uses the same codes. And it really does help when we are pulling numbers for you all. So there are some that you probably won't use. There's some like this one here, for example, dorm. The only 2 colleges that are going to use the detail code dorm is going to be North Georgia and South Georgia, because those are the 2 colleges that have dorms, right? So there may be some here that you guys don't use, but that's not to say that they're not important. Other schools may use them. You don't have to use everyone, but you have to use the ones that are here for the codes that you use. Here is where I was talking about where we give you a little bit of wiggle room. So if you go down here in the wildcards section, anything that has a percent here, the percent means that it can be anything you want it to be. As long as it, in this particular case, starts with a K, you can make the next three digits anything you want, numbers or characters in any order. For this one here, if you were doing fatherhood, right? As long as it starts with an FH and ends in a P, you can make that middle character anything you want. So it allows the colleges to have a little bit of wiggle room where you guys need that little bit of wiggle room, because each college, even though we're trying to function all the same, is slightly different when it comes to some of the things that you teach and some of the things that you do. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at things. Your third-party detail codes, those are the ones where most of you are probably the most familiar, where you're like X1 or X something something P, X something something C. All of those, you know, kind of roll the way that you guys need them to do. So on the banner matrix, this very first page is going to be mostly your charge codes, right? So these are your charge detail codes, the payments that go along with it, your refunds, your checks, your wires, your fee waivers, write-off codes, and then, you know, your SBO 7 write-off codes. So these are going to be your charges, right? Then down here are overpayment codes. So if your college uses overpayment codes, and then down here is the reclassification codes. So if your college reclassifies, if you're thinking, what is reclassification? Your college probably doesn't do it, so don't worry about it, right? Then the second tab right here is your wildcard tab, but it's also your awards and payments tab. So this is your awards and payments for all of our financial aid fund sources that we have, and a few other things in between. And then down at the very bottom, like we just talked about, is your wildcards that you're allowed to use. Just keep in mind, if you are a person that creates detail codes, you have to look at the matrix. You have to know the matrix, and you have to learn the matrix. And the matrix is updated when we get new fund sources, when we get new codes, when we get all of the fun new things, right? So this is important. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about detail code combination limitations. Okay, So if we look at the detail code combination limitations, when I say that, I say this. We talked about the detail codes are only 4 characters long, right? So there's only 4, can't be more than 4. So if we take this fatherhood entry right here, if we look at this and we say, okay, well, there's an FH and a P that has to be there for the payment, and there's an FH and C that has to be there for the charge. The only option we have to be a wild card is this little guy right here on the end. And how many numbers do you have? 0 through 9, right? So you have 9 numbers, and that's it. We have, what is the alphabet? 26 characters in the alphabet, and that's it, right? So we have limitations in how we do this, right? So, you know, once you go from 0 to 9, you're done with the numbers. You can't use any more numbers because it would be the same detail code repeating, right? And you can't do that. Once you go A through Z on these, you can't go any further, right? So we run into this a lot when we have, especially your third-party contracts, right? When you have X percent P and X percent C. And we get all of these new program codes, and we get all of these new program fees, and we get all of these different ones that everybody wants to keep track of differently, and they all want to keep track of them differently by detail code and nothing else. While that is the easiest way for you to keep track of revenue, receivables, things like that with detail codes, if you have a bajillion program fees in addition to your regular tuition fees and your regular charges, you're going to run out of letters and numbers and letter and number combinations eventually, right? There's only so many that you can use. 9 numbers, 26 alphabetical letters. So when you're setting up your third-party contracts, when you're setting up different things, just keep in mind that you could possibly run out of numbers, especially when you get into ones where it's a single wildcard character that you're setting up and not duplicates, right? So there are times where you're going to be like, I don't have any more room. So if you can, and where you can, if you're doing program fees, try to set up a program fee that could be used for everything, right? I know that's more difficult because you're like, well, they want us to keep everything in different buckets, and the nurses want their nursing bucket, and, you know, the police academy wants their police academy bucket, and the welders want their welding bucket. All of those want their separate buckets, but that we, in the business office side, do have limitations. So I did want to kind of talk about limitations and why we can't just willy-nilly go off the rails. Okay, so let's dig into Banner for just a second. Come back over here. I'll log into my Banner. Okay, this is TSA DTC. So TSA DTC, like I said before, is your detail code control form. A lot of you are probably super familiar with this form, and some of you, if you're new, you may not be as familiar, and you may be learning it. And some of you may not have seen it before because this is not your area. But I'm going to try to go through everything and kind of go over what this form means and how this form affects other things. And then we'll kind of go from there. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is your one-to-one detail code relationships. We are very unique in the Banner world when it comes to detail code one-to-one relationships. So when I say a detail code one-to-one relationship, I mean if we have the tuition detail code, this is our tuition detail code, right? So it has matching payments to it, a one-to-one relationship to a payment. So if we have a charge, we have a matching payment for that particular charge. So for some colleges, especially if you came from a USG or a Board of Regents institution or private college, if you're using Banner, you may have a tuition charge, an activity charge, a registration charge, things like that. You may have those individual unique charges. But when it comes to payments, if it's a credit card payment and the student paid with a MasterCard, you may have one payment that's called MAST, and you put that one payment in for the total amount of the tuition, the activity fee, and the registration fee, and then those three charges would marry to that one MasterCard payment. We do not have that here at TCSG. We have a tuition charge, and then we have matching tuition payments. Here is one TUI, two TUI, three TUI. And those payments go onto the student's account based on what they paid with. If they paid with cash, it's a one TUI. If they paid with a check, it's a two TUI. If they paid with a credit card, it's a three TUI. So that is your one-to-one relationship for tuition. It always has a matching payment. Why do we do that? We don't know. To be quite honest, I will go back to Debbie Drazdowski days. So some of you may not know Debbie Drazdowski. She was the person who was in my position for a very long time. And the lady who set up Banner, we went on to Banner, we went on to Banner in 1991, if I remember correctly. It's been a very long time. This lady set it up this way. We don't know why she set it up that way. We don't have any idea why that was the way that she chose to put it up. But that's the way that she did choose to set up the detail codes as a one-to-one relationship. So I got a question in chat that says, what is the significance of having a different code for each of different payment method, and is that part of the unknown? That is part of the unknown. However, over the years, when we have been doing our different payment methods with the different receivable codes, our colleges have now gotten used to knowing that, hey, one TUI, two TUI, and three TUI is going to be, my cash for my tuition only, right? So you could go out there and you can pull information from TGI CCD, and you can know exactly the dollar amount of the cash that you got specifically for tuition. If we were to have one payment code called MAST that applied to tuition, activity, and registration fee, then when you pulled MAST, that would be everything combined, and you wouldn't know what was tuition and what was something else without breaking it down and looking at the matching charges that went along with it. So for us, we've learned that does make it easier on us when we're trying to pull, especially when we're doing TGI CCD queries. Is that something that might change? I've heard some rumblings that it might change, but I think at this moment between that change and Workday and all the stuff that's coming, there might be a revolt. So I don't know that it's something that's going to happen super soon, but I have heard rumblings of maybe getting rid of the one-to-one detail code in favor of the other, but it would significantly impact the back-end accounting office, and they may not be as gung-ho for changing that at the moment. So that is our one-to-one relationship. That is why we have a one-to-one relationship. We don't really know why the lady that originally set this up in 1991 decided to do it this way, but that's how she did it, and it's been that way for so long, we've just kind of been rolling with it. All right, what we're going to do right now is we're going to go through this TSA DETC form, I'm going to talk about what all these columns mean and some functionality of TSA DETC. And then if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to ask them, you know, feel free. So I'm watching chat. I've got it pulled up. So okay. So detail codes. Detail code is just what it is. Your 4-digit unique identifier that identifies whatever charge and or payment that you are entering in to Banner. It's very important that you know whether it's a charge or whether it's a payment, because you have to tell Banner, is this a payment or is this a charge, for it to know what to do with it, right? So this is your detail code. It's the 4-digit character, and again, these have to be on the Banner matrix, or if they are a wild card, which more than likely this one right here is, or this one right here is. If it's a wild card, it's unique to your college, but you just have to make sure that you're not trying to set up the same detail code twice. It won't let you do that, just so you know, but you can only have one unique detail code. The detail code description is just that. You're describing what this detail code does, okay? So that's plain and simple what it does. You can sort these two just like you do all of the other forms. If you click the order, and you can expand columns on these just like all of your other forms, so that you can see the full thing. Your payment or your charge. This is whether this is a payment, which is P for payment, or whether it's a charge, C for charge. This is very important. If you get this wrong, it's going to be wrong when you enter it on TASREV. And once you enter something on TASREV, you cannot delete it from TSA DETC. It will not let you. It goes back to that little thing we talked about earlier called referential integrity. So this is what you would consider the parent form for the detail codes. And when you enter a detail code into TASREV, that becomes the child, right? If a child exists, you cannot delete the parent. So you can delete, if I were to put something in and hit save right now and say, oh gosh, I did that wrong, I could immediately turn around and delete it from this form. But if I entered it in and then went to TASREV, entered that in and saved it, and then said, oh no, I entered it wrong, I can't delete that record anymore. Then I've just wasted a detail code. There are some things I will say that we can fix. This type is the prime example. If you were to accidentally put a C here and you were to accidentally put a P here when you're setting these up, we can come in and make a change to these via SQL. It has been a very long time since I've had to do that, and I'll be honest, I can't remember when I changed this via SQL if your TASREV entry updates correctly, or if you have to reverse it all first, then I update it here, and then you put it back in. I think that's the order in which it has to go, that you will have to reverse off the incorrect entry on TASREV, then call me or Tracy and have us update this record to the correct entry, then you'll put the entry back in on TASREV. I do believe that's the order in which it has to happen. But we can change this, okay? Category codes. Category codes are unique to your college. They are what you want them to be, and they are choosable through a form. So this is so TTV DCAT is your validation form, because the third letter is a V. So if the third letter in a form is a V, it means it's a validation form. So this category code has to exist in this TTV DCAT before you can choose it for here or enter it for here. So each college has their own set of category codes. Some of them will be the same. A lot of you have this one in particular. I think it's TRA. TRA at 99.9% of the colleges, that's what all of your grants and scholarships are, right? And then fee is pretty standard at every college. If it's a fee, you have it marked as a fee. And then tuition is also pretty standard with TUI. TUI and FEE category codes are super important for registration, because when a student registers with the category code of TUI or FEE, when they do a drop, those are automatic drops. Anything outside of that is not an automatic drop when a student is dropping. So most of you have probably had your registrar change that for you, because a lot of us had books, especially when we were doing Move On When Ready, that needed to be automatically dropped and things like that. But just keep that in mind. TUI and FEE are the only ones that are automatically dropped during the registration process. And these are all very different at the colleges in lieu of TRA, LON, FEE, TUI, and probably RFD. Cash, check, and charge are all kind of all over the place. So keep that in mind at your college. Those are up to you. Those are not standardized. However, this category code is very important when it comes to 1098-Ts. Anything within different categories that are on your category rules for your 1098-Ts, if you put a new category code in here, or if you put something in the incorrect category, then you're going to pull that information on your 1098-T. So just keep that in mind. When you add new category codes, you also have to go and update your 1098-T rules. Those are important when it comes to that. Grant type, we do not use, because we do not use Banner Finance. Okay, so you don't have to put anything there. It is not a required field. The only ones that are required are the ones with the stars. But you do have to have a lot of them, right? Okay, priority. Priority code is something that is required, and we have certain priority codes. They are all different at each and every college. So you have to go and look at your college. So at this particular college, 997 is all tuition, except for this guy down here, right? So this is an employee activity code. So, and then you have an activity fee waived in here. So if we were to run application of payment, we could have the possibility of having a tuition payment apply to an activity fee charge, simply because we have the priority codes different. Each detail code should have its own priority code for the charge portion. So, for example, if let me do this. Let me clear this out. If I want to look at charges, if you notice, let's get out of the fours. Let's just reorder that. These are refund codes, but I don't want to be in the refund codes. I'm going to jump a few pages and get into some of our regular. Okay, so here's TUIT. All right, but if you notice, you have truck driving tuition, which is TUTD at this particular college. You have TUIT, you have TUHS at this particular college, and then you probably have TWWR or something, TUWR or something like that later. But anyway, all of those are set at 997 because they are all tuition. But this one you have set at 984 because it probably has a different charge. I say all this to say every charge should have its own individual priority code. Now, anything that starts with a 9 is our main charges. So your tuition, your activity fee, your registration fee, your TCKK fee, all of our basic fees are the ones that should be something 9 and above, right? Because when we are doing application of payments, we do change these priority codes to 900 for our financial aid, and we apply everything, that starts with a 9. We apply financial aid to all of that first. However, there are going to be some of you that may have bookstore charges and things like that that are down in the 800s, right? If you create a detail code and you assign it a priority that's lower than 9, which you're going to have to if you have a lot of fees or a lot of program fees or, that type of stuff, you have to make sure that the person that's running application of payments, if they are not you or one and the same, that they know that they're going to have to change their priority code to 900, run application of payments, then turn around and change their priority code to 800, and then turn around and run application of payments. And if you have them in 7 and 6 and 5 and 4 and 3, you have to know that you have to notify that person if you're putting them down into the lower digits. But just remember that each charge has to have its own unique priority code. Then all of your payments should have the matching priority code from the charge. So if you set TUIT to 997, then 1 TUIT, 2 TUI3, 3 TUIT, 4 TUIT, 5 TUIT, all of those priority codes should also be 997, right? Because when we're making application of payments, we want the cash payment most of the time to apply to that first, unless they have hope, right? So we'll talk about that again when we get into application of payments. So priority code is important. Refund code really doesn't matter on the refund code. Most of the time we do set them to an M or none. Refund code is important if we had Banner Finance and we were doing checks through the Banner Finance system, but we don't. We have our own custom. We don't have Banner Finance and we have our own custom check writing program. So you don't have to worry about the refund code as much. The only thing that you have to know about the refund column is never, ever, 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 ever set the refund code to P. Don't ever do that. P means a Parent Plus loan, and you will start getting these weird messages on your detail codes when you're trying to enter data into TASREV, and you won't know what in the world is going on. And most of the time when we've seen that, we found that people put a P in the refund code, and most of the time it's by accident. They didn't even realize that they did it. So just make sure it's either an M or none. It can also be Y, but just never P. All right, direct deposit. We do not do direct deposit for Banner Finance. That one can be left blank. Refundable, we generally check refundable because most of our stuff is all refundable. Receipt, your receipt should be checked, and receipt only needs to be checked for payments, right? Because a charge is not going to get a receipt, but a payment does. So payments will be the one where the receipt is checked. And active should always be checked unless it is not active. So if you look at this one right here, 1 CDL, the cash payment for the CDL test fee, is not an active detail code. If it's not active, you can't use it in TASREV. And this is how you stop people from using detail codes. Say, for instance, you accidentally, well, let's just say you entered a detail code and you guys have been using, I don't know, X1FC and X1FP for, I don't know, let's just say sales tax. We'll use that as an example. Sales tax for the bookstore for third party. Say you've been using that for years and then all of a sudden you guys don't break out sales tax anymore, which has actually happened. I don't think any colleges break out sales tax anymore for books, but you have a huge amount of entries on TASREV for those particular detail codes. So you can't delete that detail code, but you don't want people to continue using it either. Come here, uncheck active and save it. That way it won't allow anybody to use it anymore. So that's how you make one inactive. Term-based and aid-year-based, I might know of 2 colleges that use this. Most colleges do not use term-based or aid-based information, so these should both be unchecked unless your college specifically does aid-based and term-based. Then we get into like term, like aid year, and like period. So these are very, very important when it comes to application of payments. So in general, you are going to want to have like term checked on all of your detail codes. When you check like term, that says to application of payments, I will only apply payments to a charge where the terms are the same. So if I have a 2024-12 payment and I have a 2024-12 charge, like term says, oh yes, those can apply to each other. If I have a 2024-12 payment and a 2024-14 charge, if you have like term checked, they will not apply to each other, even if they have the same priority code. There are times where you will need to come here and uncheck like term. The example I just gave, a 2024-12 payment that you want to apply to a 2024-14 charge. You come here, you uncheck like term, you run your application of payments, you come back here and you check it and save it again. That's how you apply payments to future terms. Like aid year. Like aid year functions very similar as like term, except for instead of looking at it by term, it looks at it by aid year. So for example, 2024-12, 2024-14, and 2024-16 are all fall in the 2023-24 aid year for financial aid, if I remember correctly. If you have like aid year checked, if you have a 2024-12 payment and you have a 2024-16 charge, that will allow it to apply. And yes, for those that don't know, it is okay for Pell, 2024-12 Pell can apply to any term inside the same aid year. So if you have 2024-12 Pell and you've paid all of your 2024-12 charges and you still have leftover Pell, and this student also has charges outstanding in 2024-14 or 16, you can apply that Pell rather than giving that student a refund. You can apply that Pell to 2024-14 and 2024-16, as long as it is inside the same aid year. When it gets outside the different aid years, so you can't apply 2024-16 Pell to 2025-12 charges without a TIV authorization and it's anything within the same aid year. Pell can be applied to anything inside the same aid year. When you get outside of the aid year, that's where it's either prior and not future, right? Like period, there are very few colleges that use like period, but like period functions very similar to like aid year and like term, but we don't really have like period, so I wouldn't worry about that. Your like term and your like aid year are going to be the main ones that everybody uses. And when you're getting into prior year Pell, it's like TIV authorization and only $200 can go to prior year for Pell application. All right, GL Interable. We don't use GL Interable because we don't have Banner Finance. And then your pay type, it's also a drop-down list, so it has to exist in this drop-down list, which is your validation table for your payment types, which is TTB PAYT. And then you have cash payments, exemptions, financial aid, miscellaneous credits, and third party. This is up to your college how you list them. Don't go by what this database says. This is a test database where we come in here and we do crazy things. So don't pay attention to the fact that this is a miscellaneous credit on, you know, like a 1 UI. So you go by what is in your college, but your cash type, your exemptions, financial aid. Now, I will say F for financial aid is probably going to be on all your financial aid stuff. Tax type we don't use, so you can ignore that. TIV, so TIV, so your Title IV, this is Title IV. So the main ones that are going to be checked as Title IV here are Pell and SEOG, because those are your Title IV payments. Now, some colleges have their HOPE checked as Title IV. HOPE is not a Title IV fund. However, when you're doing application of payments, most of you probably have the parameter on TGRA PPL set to apply TIV first. So if you do that, then the TIV applies before anything else, which then would allow your HOPE to apply to your tuition first. And then if they make a payment, that sits out there and you can give them a cash refund. So you could do that. Don't make any of those changes if you don't have that already set up without talking to your leadership in your area. That's just how it is. Now, with it being checked as a Title IV fund, it falls under the Title IV rules. Okay, so, you know, prior term, $200 with a TIV authorization, it has to apply to an institutional charge, right? Type deal. So TIV, and then the next column, institutional charge, goes hand in hand. Any charge that your institution considers an institutional charge should be checked. An institutional charge is a charge that is charged to all students or all students in a program. Let me give you an example of something that most colleges have checked as an institutional charge, but technically it is not an institutional charge. A late fee is not an institutional charge. It is not charged to every student, nor is it charged to every student in the program. It's only charged to students who are late registering. So technically that is not an institutional charge, but I would say 90% of our colleges probably have that checked as an institutional charge because you want that to be paid from Pell. A library fine is not an institutional charge. It's not charged to every student. It's not charged to every student in the program. It's only charged to those students who don't return their books on time or they did something to get a library fine. A library fee could be an institutional charge because you're charging it either to every student or to every student in a program. So institutional charge, if checked, will automatically come out of your TIV payments. If it's not checked, then the student has to have a TIV authorization in order for that to apply. Non-allowable charge, exclude an invoice print and payment history, we don't use because, again, those are used with Banner Finance and other options that we don't have. And then last but not least, you have these three default areas. Some colleges use these. Some colleges do not. Some colleges use default amount, but they do not use a default term or default effective date. I would be very leery of using default effective date, simply because the default effective date, once you enter information into these three, it affects everybody that enters something onto TASREV. And if people don't pay attention to what pops up automatically for them in TASREV, then they could be putting information into the wrong term and also putting information in with the wrong effective date, which could very much come into play in application of payments, refunds, return to Title IV calculations. All of that affects all of those areas. So that's why we say that the TSA DET form should be limited, because not only does it affect, could it affect everyone in your area, but it could affect a whole lot of people in financial aid and return to Title IV calculations. So when you use default amount, default term, and not that, but this, okay, I would say don't use this. But these two, a lot of colleges use. You have to go in and you have to update these because they don't change depending on the term and depending on the amount. If your amount for your activity fee, I'm thinking this is the activity fee, for the activity fee changes from $38 to $70, then you have to go in here and update that. If not, when your cashiers are entering in your ACTI and they hit the tab key, that $38 and the 2023-14-12 or 2023-14 term is going to automatically pop in to TASREV for them. So if that's wrong, they have to pay attention and go back and change it, or they have to notify somebody that's going in wrong so that that person can update the information. So some colleges update the default amount because usually the amount of your tuition and fees only changes once a year, but your term changes all the time. So most of them leave that out. And that was the activity fee. So that's what those columns do. So last portion of this, I'm going to show you if you're looking at this individual one and you don't want to keep scrolling back and forth across the screen, you can hit this little guy right here, which is the single record, and then it will change it to a single record so that you can see it all on one screen for each individual charge. And then if you hit your down arrow on your keyboard, it will scroll through all of your records, or you can use the blue arrow down here. Okay, so let me put this back here and let me pull up the tuition charge. Now we're going to look at the general ledger. So if you, let me hit that back up. If you find your tuition charge or whatever charge you're looking at and you want to see the GL information below, you can either come down here to the bottom left and hit the down arrow, or you can do Alt page down, and this will take you to the general ledger interface. So this is when you're setting up detail codes, where the general ledger information goes, so that when you guys feed your information out of Banner and you give your reports to the back end accounting office, this is the general ledger information that they use to enter your, or do JVs and enter in receivables and revenue and cash and all of that into PeopleSoft. So these have to be right. Now, a lot of people get very confused when it comes to the general ledgers. And they call us and they say, what is this supposed to be? We can't really tell you that because, again, colleges do their own things. And some colleges use numbers, some colleges use words, some colleges use a combination of words and numbers when they're doing their general ledger account information. So Tracy and I are not going to be able to tell you what you need to put there. That is going to be something that you need to talk to your PeopleSoft accounting folks, your accounting director, or your VPA to find out what you need it to be, right? So for tuition, though, in this particular case, for this general ledger interface, the A account is receivable tuition and the B account is revenue tuition. And so for the accounting folks, now I am not an accountant and I don't know accounting very well, but for the most part, it kind of runs like this. So you're going to, in this particular case, you're going to, and if somebody correct me if I'm wrong, debit your receivable because you're increasing your receivable because this is a tuition charge. So the receivable will increase. And then you're also debiting your revenue for tuition in this particular case, and you will increase your revenue. So this will be a debit to your receivable and debit to your tuition because it will make both of those go up on the PeopleSoft side. So your receivables will go up, but so will your revenue, right? We always debit this at 100% generally. So when you're setting this up, when you come in, there is an effective date. So the effective date on this one is saying that I have been effective since 10/28 of 2023. So this right here is a multiple record form. So you never get rid of a record, you update a record. So because if you notice, this one has been effective since 10/28 of 2023, but the next change date is blank, which means it is the most active record, okay? This is where you would check term-based or aid-based year. Again, most colleges are not doing that. But if we go back a record by hitting this blue arrow, if you'll notice, this effective date was 1/1/1980, and the next change date is 10/28/2003. Well, that date right there looks familiar because guess what? That was the effective date for the second record, right? That means that receivable tuition and revenue tuition were in place from 1980 to 2003. And then in 2003, they made a change. In this particular case, they didn't make a change technically, but this was probably us playing around. Remember, this is a test database. But if I needed to make a change, then I could come here, create a new record, make the change either here or here, wherever I needed to, save it, and then any record from 1980 to 2003 would operate under this A and B account. Any record from 2003 forward operates under this A and B account. I hope that makes sense. But once you get them set, most of the time they don't change, right? So if you remember this, it's receivable tuition, revenue tuition on your A and B account. So now if we go back and we look at 3 TUI, this is a payment. So if we go look at the GL information, this one says electronic payment tuition and receivable tuition, right? So that's why I say we can't really tell you what this should be and what it shouldn't be. But in general, in looking at this, your A account here, if you're taking a payment in for tuition, then you're going to be debiting your cash because most of the time this is cash. And a lot of colleges will have cash tuition, right, as their description so that they know what it is. But some colleges just have numbers. They have the PeopleSoft number of the fund that it goes into on PeopleSoft, right? So it just depends on how your college does it. But this is probably going to be, I'm guessing, your cash. So this will be a debit to cash because it's going to increase your cash. But then receivable tuition is over here, and this will be a credit to your tuition receivables because that cash payment is going to reduce your tuition receivables. Okay? So that's kind of how they work. Same thing here. We do 100%. This one has 4 records. So if we go back to the beginning, this one was a CR. Okay, so this one's a good one. CR card tuition and receivable tuition from 1980 to 2003. Then from 2003, they must have made a mistake because once you do this, you can't undo it. So then they just kept making changes to it. And then finally, in 2012, they updated this. And so detail codes from 1980 to 2003 operate under this. And then anything from 2012 forward operated under this, if that makes sense. Okay, I think I've talked your ear off about CAS, CSA DETC, and the detail code control form. So I hope that gave you an in-depth look at that, and I hope maybe it went over some fields that you didn't know how they functioned or operated, maybe. All right, so let's get into TASRIV. So I'm going to enter in a couple of charges. We're going to note the balances. I'm going to enter in a payment. We're going to note the balance. I'm going to enter in a reversing payment and a reversing charge and note the balance. And then we're going to talk about something that's super confusing to end the day. And then kind of let you mull over and check over it, okay? So let's enter an activity just simply because activity had a default amount and a default term set so that you can see kind of what that does. So if we enter in an activity charge, oh, that one didn't have one, did it? Must have been the payment. Okay, if we enter in an activity charge of 2023-12, we're just going to type in, oh, I don't know how much an activity charge is. I don't know. We're just going to make one up, 50. Okay. So if we look at the activity charge, it showed up in the charge payment. So when I hit the tab key, it went straight to the charge column, and the balance is a positive amount. So the reason why that happened is because on TSA DETC, ACTI has a type of C for charge. So it goes to the charge column with a positive balance because a charge is a positive amount. Okay? So now, if I enter in a payment, I think this is the one that had the entry on the default amount and term. Yes, it did. Okay. So now if I enter in ACT1 and I hit the tab button, because there was a default amount entered and a default term on TSA DETC, that automatically populated in. So in this particular case, the term is populating in wrong because I'm trying to make a payment on a different term, and the amount's populating in wrong. Let's just say somebody forgot to update the amount, right? So as a cashier, I have to be paying attention to this to realize that, oh, that's $50, not $38, and this is 2023-12 and not 2023-14. So let me change that, and let me change, and I hit my tab key because if you hit your tab key, it helps you. And I'm going to change that to 50 because that's the dollar amount. Now, if you notice, one ACT was set up as a payment on TSA DETC. So when I hit the tab key, it automatically goes into the payment column and has a balance of a negative $50. So payments should always have a balance, and the balance is very different from the amount, right? So we call the dollars in this column amounts. This is their balance, okay? So the balance is quite different from the charge. It's negative. So a payment balance is always negative if it's in its normal state, okay? This also goes to year-end when you're cleaning up year-end accounts. So if I were to run application of payments right now, because I have a positive amount and a negative amount, those two are going to marry together and zero out, and then that particular charge is paid in full for the student. Okay? I'm not going to do that because I don't want to get into the application of payments aspect at the moment because that's coming up next. So what we're going to do now is now I'm going to say, oops. Well, actually, let me save that. I'm going to save it first. Let me save it. Okay. So now I say, oops, I shouldn't have put in that charge or that payment. So let me reverse out the charge. So 2023-12. Now it's going to automatically go to the charge column because it is a charge. Charges go in the charge column and they have a positive balance. But in this particular case, I am reversing the charge, right? So I'm going to put in a negative $50. And when I hit the tab key, it's going to make that show up as a negative $50. The reason for that is when you run application of payment, this ACTI and this ACTI, so the one with the positive balance and the one with the negative balance, should marry together, and that will zero out the ACTI charge. Then you're going to do the same thing with your payment, because we can reverse out the payment. Again, we have to make sure it's in the same term. But in this particular case, now we're going to put in a negative $38, a negative $50, because it's not 38, it's 50. This is where people get very confused when they're entering information into Banner. It's important that you pay attention to the balance and don't hit the save key in order to make that balance populate. Always enter the payment or the charge, then hit the tab key so that you know that this balance is right before you save it, because you can delete this record before you save it. But once you save it, you can't delete it. Then you just have to keep doing entries until you figure out what you did to fix it, or until you figure out what you did so that you can fix it, right? So in this particular case, if I were to go here and put $50, it's going to make that a 50. Well, then if I look here, I have a negative 50 and a negative 50. A negative 50 and a negative 50 do not make zero, right? They make a $100 credit on the student's account. So you have to make sure that you're putting it in correctly, because it can be confusing. So now I have one ACTI with a positive negative 50 and a one ACTI with a positive 50. That will make zero, and that will zero out the original payment. Now, here is the most confusing thing in Banner. A charge in its normal state will always have a positive balance. So this charge here, ACTI, is in its normal state because it's a charge and has a positive balance. This ACTI here is not in its normal state because it's a charge, but it has a negative balance. Remember how we said earlier, charges always have a positive balance and payments always have a negative balance. Same thing with payments. A payment in its normal state has a negative balance, and a payment in its non-normal state has a positive balance. So in Banner, a negative charge is considered a payment, and a positive payment is considered a charge. Very confusing, but if you can get that pushed into your head, if you can get it in your head, that will help you when you're reversing charges, especially. And the reason for that is, this is a charge, but if I were to put another ACTI charge out here and let that balance positive, then it would increase the student's balance. But I want to decrease the student's balance, so I have to make that charge a payment, essentially, is what I'm doing, in order to counteract that original charge. Same thing with a payment. A payment is generally a negative because it decreases the student's balance. But when I'm reversing off a payment, it has to be positive because a positive and a negative will marry together. But a negative and a negative should never marry together, but they do. And a positive will never marry together. I know that's super confusing. You may have to listen to this portion of it, you know, several times. But if you can get that in your head, then when you're doing reversing entries, especially when you're doing reversing entries, it will help tremendously. Also, using the tab key and not entering in, doing the entry, putting the dollar amount here, and then hitting the F10 key to save in order for it to populate. Because I know a lot of people do that, and then they hit F10, and then they're like, oh, that wasn't the right balance. And then they kind of have a panic moment, and then they do it again, and then they keep making issues on top of issues on top of issues, when if they had looked at it to start with and know that you should have a negative and a positive that marry together. That should be your normal state, a negative and a positive, that should be marrying together. Now you do have negatives that will marry together on occasion, and those are difficult to stop, but they can be fixed at a later date. Okay. All right, that is all I have for today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, we'll do that.